everyone. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak here today. My name is Nico Schouten, and I work at Metabolic. And I will briefly introduce the company that I work for, and then I will introduce you a bit to the topic of the circular economy and how it's very, very directly related to the work that you're doing on an everyday basis. So first a bit about my company. I work for Metabolic, and our mission is to transition the global economy towards a fundamental sustainable state. And I think it aligns very well with my previous speaker. It's something that we all have the privilege to work on. My company consists of 5 different entities where we both do consulting, advice to companies such as your own, research, which are with our institute, venture building, where we create our own companies, which we see missing in a transition towards a sustainable economy. Software development to really scale our knowledge and make it available to all. And also with our foundation, we do a lot of social outreach to make sure that everybody can be part of this sustainable transition. Over the past 10 years, because we've been around for 10 years, we've worked all over the world, but still our main head office is in Amsterdam, right across the North Sea. And in this past year, we've worked with many different types of organizations, such as banks, cities, food providers, the WWF. So working on this from a very broad and holistic point of view. The work that we do focuses on 6 transitions. So there's 3 really concrete physical transitions that we're working on: the transitions of cities, of industries, and the agri-food system. But more importantly, more directly related to the heart, we also focus on finance, on governance, and on the mindset, because we believe they're all needed to really make this push towards the sustainable future that we all so dearly want to live in. And what's really important about our way of working is that we take a systems perspective, because everything in the universe is directly tied together, and if you don't take the systems perspective, you have the potential to do some burden shifting. And to illustrate that a bit, I want to take you back a few decades, and when we look at what's been happening over the past decades, we can see a lot of exponential growth. So the exponential growth in the world population, the amount of CO2 that we emit into the world, the amount of fresh water that we consume, the ecotoxicity going through the roof. And as we all have learned during the COVID crisis, exponential growth in a closed-off system never leads to a well end. And as the Earth is also a closed system with finite resources, we need to understand that these closed systems with these exponential growth can really quickly lead to tipping points. And this tipping point, what we mean is that it's very possible that we cross the planetary boundary that is needed to facilitate our life and our way of living on this Earth by focusing on this exponential consumption, really, that we're talking about here. We've been consuming so much that we even have our own era now. So in the future, the time and the place that we live in now will be known as the Anthropocene, the human era, and because we're really leaving our lasting mark on this planet. Because when we look at our current society, we can see that we as humans have a certain idea of what a productive system is. This can be a city, this can be an industry, it can be a beach where we can rent out chairs. But when we look at what the planet sees as a productive system, it's vastly different. It's more about regeneration, it's about being in balance. And right now we are a very extractive influence on this planet. So much so that we're leaving those lasting marks, both in our current way of working. This is a lithium mine, where we're taking vast amount of resources to keep facilitating our way of living in the now, but also in the future, because we are producing a lot of resources which we can't reuse, but which will outlive us by a few centuries, if not more. But for me, maybe the most important problem is that we're also leaving our traces elsewhere in communities which can't really help it or can't really defend themselves, so to say. So it's for us really about understanding the impact we have here, the impact we have there, the impact we have now, but also the impact we have later. And if you don't take all these into consideration, it's very hard to really work on this sustainable future. Many of the issues I've shown you today are directly related to the linear economy. So the linear economy is the economy we're in now, where we take resources from our Earth, we make something with it, and then we waste it. And you can imagine that all these steps in the process require both resources, but also energy, and have a certain environmental impact on our world. And this can be a very broad, diverse range of impact, because all these impacts push the planetary boundaries. This planetary boundaries is a model which is developed by the Stockholm Resiliency Center, which really looks at the 9 sort of parameters which are needed to make sure that our planet is in balance. I'm going to briefly explain to you how this model works. So you have in the middle the green zone, which is where we are in the safe zone, really, where the planet can balance itself out. Then there's the orange zone, where there are some changes happening, but we are still good to go. We can reverse it. And then the red zone is where we really have transgressed these planetary boundaries. And when we talk about sustainability, we almost always talk about carbon, the emission of carbon, which is very important, of course. But when we look at the climate change piece of the pie, we can see we're still in the orange zone, and the 1.5 degrees from the Paris Climate Accord would be the tipping point where we will see really big changes in the way our planet functions. At the same time, we can see there's 8 other planetary boundaries, some which are still in the good. So there's some freshwater use, which is kind of good. There's ozone depletion, which is still doing okay. But then when we look, for instance, at biosphere integrity, we can see that there's really a big problem. We are transgressing the planetary boundaries. Too much of the species on this planet are dying out, which will make it very hard for this planet to live in a structural manner. The same with biochemical flows. In the Netherlands, there's now a very, very big problem on nitrogen depositions, which really are on the one hand harming our environment, but at the same time also is currently prohibiting our farmers to do what the Dutch agriculture sector is famously for, producing a lot of food. So we can see that the real economy is starting to interact with these problems in a very structural way. And as I said, we are starting to see the first signs of us running into these planetary boundaries. So there's extreme droughts, there's floods, there's pollution, there's chemical waste. And all of these are the first signs that this really is the moment to start doing something. So what we need to do, we need to build a better and different future. And one of the ways to look at it is really to understand that our current economy, the linear economy, is not using the resources in the right way. We need to focus on a circular economy. And what's really interesting about the circular economy is that it tackles not only resource use, but it very directly links to all the other planetary boundaries that I've also shown you about. So this is, for instance, research by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which shows that 45% of all emissions, carbon emissions, are directly related to our consumption of goods. So even if we completely decarbonize the energy grid, we still need to really think about the resources that we produce if we really want to reach this net zero that we're all desperately trying to reach. So how to define a circular economy? And this is a question I get very often, and it's a very difficult topic because scientifically speaking, there are over 114 definitions of a circular economy. One is created again by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which really focuses on the technical aspects, so on different types of loops, where you have both the biochemical loop, which is focused more on bio-based materials, which can degenerate and be composted, and on the technical loop, which really focuses on repairing, recycling, remanufacturing products to make sure that we extend their lifespan, and by doing so, reduce the ecological impact. But our question is, if I can send my iPhone to the other side of the planet, have it repaired, am I really building this better future that I dream about? If it happens under dire circumstances without a fair pay. And we think no. So that's why impact thinking needs to be holistic. It's not just about environmental impact, it's about social impact, the governance as the ESG that we have been talking about so much. So should this circular economy abide by these rules. And that's why we at Metabolic, we work with the 7 pillars of the circular economy when we talk about circularity. So it's about recycling materials, it's about reducing energy consumption or having clean energy consumption. It's about water consumption, biodiversity, culture, health, and human values. Because if you don't keep all these 7 into consideration, you have the very real likelihood of burden shifting, where you take the problem and just push it to the other side of the spectrum. It's out of my hands, it's out of my responsibility, but we're not really working on that more sustainable future that we have been dreaming about altogether. Another thing that's really important in a circular economy is the perception of value. So we have financial value, which is of course very productive, very important for our everyday businesses, but at the same time we also need to think about ecological value. So in this model on the left, you can see what we call the value hill. And when we have a process in which we produce a product, on the left, in every step, value is added. So we extract resources, we manufacture something, we assemble something, we sell it, and then the user uses it at the height of the value hill. And then once the user no longer needs it, we throw it into the bin, and it goes directly to the landfill, and all this value is being destroyed. In a circular economy, we can still use resources. So again, we add a lot of value. The first step is really extending the lifespan of the product, so to make sure that the user uses it as long as possible. And then we have these R strategies, as we call them. So the first is to reuse. And as you can see, this first arrow actually makes sure that the value of the product is retained at its highest level. Then you can refurbish, which means that some changes need to be made, and then you can resell it, again, keeping it much higher on this value base. And this is, for a financial point of view, very important, because right now using renewable or new resources is not very expensive. In the future, it will be. At the same time, there's also a lot of ecological value saved, which really significantly reduces our environmental impact on the planet. And what's really important when talking about the circular economy is this multi-scalar approach. So our economy touches all levels of our, this is spatial planning, so therefore our strategy should also do this. So have an understanding all the way from the material or the individual components to the regional and national strategies. They should all be linked to make sure that value can be protected throughout the chain, and the ecological impact on our environment can be reduced as much as possible. So that was a lot of theory, which is I always like to do to kind of set the target, but what's really important for us is to also start implementing these changes and to work on real life projects. So how do you translate all these ambitious targets into concrete solutions and measurable results that can really achieve this change? We have a 5-step process where it's very clearly aligned and linked to a lot of the processes that are being followed today, where the first maybe is the most important for us. So really understanding where you are from a systemic perspective. It's about the environmental impact you create, but also the role that you play within the system that you are in. Because again, we are very much focused on the systems thinking and transforming a system instead of making just one individual project better. The second one is really goal setting. So where do we want to go from here? And again, define very clear and measurable goals on all 7 pillars, not just on CO2 emissions or environmental impact in the energy realm. Focus on interventions to get there, implement, of course, and then maybe the most important, well, the second most important, is really measuring the impact that you have had once the project has been implemented and sharing this knowledge with the broader ecosystem. Because again, I can innovate, but if you innovate and you innovate, we don't have to reinvent the wheel 20,000 times before we can reach our goal. So what we've been doing over the past 10 years through our collaboration with many different organizations is really trying to transform our economy through bottom-up experimentation and really try to implement this change that we see so fit. And the case study that I want to talk to you about is the city of Amsterdam. So we've been working, our main office is in the city of Amsterdam, but we've been also working with the city of Amsterdam quite a lot. And in these past 10 years, we've been working on many different projects. We call it our decade of change. And I'm going to walk you through some of the things that we have done to also show you how small-scale experiments can really lead to a systems change on a much broader level. So we're starting small. The first project that Metabolic did is a competition for the redevelopment of a brownfield site in Amsterdam North. This brownfield site was a former shipyard which was supposed to be redeveloped, but then the economic crisis hit. There was no project to be developed here. There was no one who found it interesting enough from a financial point of view. And then the municipality of Amsterdam put out a tender into the world and asked, how can we make this place something better, and how can we really trial innovation here? So Metabolic, together with a team of partners, enrolled in this project to transform this site from a brownfield, which it was, into a innovative clean tech playground, as we used to call it. So there's multiple things we did here. We understood first what is the environmental impact that redeveloping this site could mean, but also what's the current situation on this location. So it was a heavily polluted site with a lot of heavy metals in the ground because of the fact that it was a shipyard for many, well, centuries actually. There was a lot of need for affordable office spaces in this region. There was a need for trialing, there was a need for jobs. And what we did, we created this place where we took houseboats from all over Amsterdam. We retrofitted them to make them energy efficient and put them on land to create office spaces for social and innovative entrepreneurs who needed a place within Amsterdam to have an office space. We planted different types of plants which, through phytoremediation, cleaned the soil on an annual basis. They are replanted, and by not doing anything, not investing an extra euro into this plot, we are cleaning the soil with the use of nature-based solutions. We are implementing different types of energy exchange systems. So this entire plot has a decentralized energy grid which allows the inhabitants or the people who work there to exchange the surplus energy that they've generated via a Bitcoin system, which again, these Bitcoins can be used then in the local cafe and bar to really feed the local and sustainable economy that we're looking for. And maybe most importantly, we also really invested in a place where people who are not familiar with sustainability could visit and understand what a sustainable future could look like. So the Keuvel is a cafe space as well, where we really focus on local food production via a aquaponic system, where we have both fishes and vegetable production, but it's also a cafe space where over 30,000 people a year from both Amsterdam, the Netherlands, and all over the world can visit to see what this new and different type of economy could look like. Based on this way of working, we've created this ecosystem, this innovative place where a lot of innovation, which were usually only talked about, were put together into this ecosystem approach, but also trialed and really implemented so that we could see how hard it is to implement them, but also to learn, to really see how they would work together instead of the more scientific approach. It's a very nice place to visit, so if you're ever in Amsterdam, please do come along and to really see what this different way could look like. What was really nice after finishing this project is that the surrounding neighborhood of this area development is called Buiksloterham, which is a neighborhood in Amsterdam North. And there was this idea to really make this the most sustainable neighborhood in the Netherlands, and to really talk about this different way of developing, not just for office spaces or like the cafe space that we made, but really also for an area development for people who live there. But as we saw in our Keuvel project, this collaboration was very important. So we started this project by really aligning all the relevant stakeholders who would need to be aligned to really make this the most sustainable neighborhood, and all have this really very clear declaration of intention to make this into a successful project. What it resulted into is creating very clear roadmaps. Roadmaps for energy retention, roadmaps for energy production, roadmaps for water purification, for food production, for material consumption, and also really not just having our opinion on this, but also working together with our implementation partners and people from the sector who would need to know what to really do. After this roadmap, of course, the first project started to come up, and what was really interesting and insightful was a locally community-based project which we assisted, which wanted to be a very sustainable floating community. So within the Buiksloterham area development, we helped this group of individuals to develop 40 houseboats, where for each of the houseboats a material passport was created so that they could pick their own materials, but all very sustainable materials. There was an energy plan created so that all the boats would be organized optimally. Again, the energy exchange grid could be installed to really also facilitate this community feel and to exchange this energy. But also for us, the more social aspect was very important. So it was really essential that these houseboats were not just for the 1% or for the people who could afford to pay a lot of money, but for mid-income families. So all houseboats in this area development were developed with this in mind, and in the end it worked out. So this area development is now done, and it's a very interesting, different way of living together, but very affordable and accessible for all at the moment that it was realized. Taking it from there, again, one step larger, we are now again back to this overarching neighborhood, the Buiksloterham neighborhood, where many different organizations are working on these individual projects. Again, we have just finished another project, or the tender for one of these projects, which is an area development of 3 larger blocks, which will realize over 50,000 square meters of housing, 10,000 square meters of office spaces for over 350 different apartment types, and also really facilitate this new economy of really making and retaining this value of material within this neighborhood. At the same time, there's a very high percentage of social and mid-income housing to make it accessible for all. But most importantly, or very interestingly from my perspective, is that 80% of all the materials that will be applied in this project are either bio-based and regeneratively sourced, or secondary materials which have been reused at their highest possible value, depending on the value hill that I showed you earlier. But of course, for us, what's really important is we can't do every project in this neighborhood. There's only so many things you can do. So what we've been doing with the municipality of Amsterdam is really to take again one step back and really look at this city as the ecosystem that it is. What potential is there? What material flows are there? What is the relationship between the city and its hinterlands? Because again, a city can never be an ecosystem of itself. And one of the first things that we really thought, well, we've been working on this built environment so much, on the redevelopment of new plots. How can we give the municipality the tools to make the decisions or ask the right thing to the market to kind of scale this economy without us? So what we did is we developed a set of guidelines for the municipality to do tendering on their own, so that every time that they give out a piece of land, they can ask the market parties for the right questions to really make sure that this idea of sustainable procurement, this idea of sustainable development is very well integrated into this organization. And I think that's for us the major win of our collaboration with the municipality of Amsterdam over the past 10 years. There have been many very interesting test cases, very interesting projects on which we worked, and where we really pushed the technical barriers and boundaries of what we've been doing. But at the same time, also this way of thinking is much more deeply ingrained in the municipality. And this is the topic that was introduced when I came on stage. They've become a donut city in which, at least for every decision, they're looking both at the GDP, so really the financial impact of the decisions that they make, but also at the environmental impact and the social impact from a very broad range of actors. So, how to apply this in your work? I realize that there are many different stakeholders here before me with different types of organizations, but what I do think is very important is to really understand the impact that you have from a broad perspective. And I've heard a lot of good things about SBTIs, about scope 1, 2, and 3, but really try to understand this impact in a very broad range of environmental impact. Define concrete and measurable goals. So where do you want to go? Trial small-scale innovations, but then do scale them up if they are a success, and maybe above all, share this knowledge that you have to make sure that this it's not just your organization who is scaling towards this sustainable economy, but that the whole system is. Thank you.
Well done. That's great.